couple months back, I got the opportunity to shoot a brand new Bugatti in Paris. And in this video, I'm going to take you behind the scenes on how I planned, shot and edited that video, and I'll tell you exactly how Bugatti ended up posting that video on their Instagram. Let's get into it. In November of last year, I was in Paris with a really good friend of mine called Stijn de Winter, basically just wandering around the city and taking a break from work, when I suddenly got a call from a friend of mine, Fifer, who's a photographer that lives in Paris. And he was like, "Mate, I've just planned a spontaneous shoot with a Bugatti for the following morning. Do you want to join?" And since he'd offered to take some photos for free to do the owner a favor, I thought I'd do the same and shoot a video for him. So we got up at 5:30 the next morning, we got ready for the shoot, picked up the car and started shooting on the streets of Paris. Quick disclaimer though, we originally shot this video for the owner of the car, but I'll tell you at the end of this video how Bugatti eventually reached out to me. But let's get into how I shot and edited the video first. From experience shooting cars in the past, there's at least two types of shots that I want to get. The first being shots of the car standing still, showing off interesting angles, interesting textures, and the second being rolling shots, where I filmed the Bugatti driving. Because I only heard about the shoot a couple hours before it took place, and because we only had 1 to 2 hours to shoot the car, we basically needed to improvise and come up with some cool shots in the moment. Victor from the Instagram account Ledriviste, he helped us out with an Aston Martin that he was driving that weekend. We dropped down the roof of that car and I jumped in the passenger seat, basically hung out the side of the car with my Ronin S in my hand to get the shots of the Bugatti driving. But usually when I shoot car videos, I have like a tilta rig that I mount to the front or the back of the camera car, and then I can remotely adjust the framing of the camera. But like I said, because we didn't have a lot of time, we needed to be creative and we did it this way. But be careful, it's actually kind of dangerous. Now in the edit, if you cut in between these kind of steady shots and shots of the car driving, you've got a nice balance between fast movement and solid, steady shots. If you want the video to feel fast, and if you kind of want to surprise and move the person that's looking at your video, then adding movement to your shot, adding counter movement of the camera car going left and the car you're filming going right, for example, that adds so much more of a fast and authentic feeling to the driving shots. In a future video, I'm actually planning on going into much more detail on all of the steps I take when I'm shooting cars. If you're interested in that, let me know. I actually got quite a lot of questions on my Instagram asking if we'd paid to shut down certain streets in Paris, and although I wish it were true, we didn't actually shut down any streets. We just got up really early on a Sunday morning and kind of did our best to shoot in between the traffic. And a cool effect I used here for most of the shots where the car was standing still, I set my Ronin S in FPV mode and I slowly took a couple steps back and I pulled out, and I combined this with a digital rotate and zoom out animation in post. Then you can kind of achieve a similar effect to what a camera robot could do by simply using a Ronin S stabilizer and some additional tricks in post. I actually have a flight I need to catch in about 2.5 hours because I'm shooting a job in Italy. So, I am in Italy right now and I'm here to shoot a racing team. I am just driving to the racing track, so I thought, why don't I take you guys with me to give you a quick example of why I choose certain frame rates. That's it. Oh my god! Whilst I'm filming cars, why not show you a quick difference between shooting in 25 frames per second and shooting in 50 frames per second. Here's a shot on track that I did at 25 frames per second, and here's the same shot in 50 frames per second. And just notice how much faster and how much more exciting that first shot in 25 frames per second looks. And that's why for the Bugatti shoot, I chose to shoot as much as possible in 25 frames per second, and I only shot in higher frame rates when I knew for sure that I was going to slow those shots down in the post-production. I'm currently standing in the Italian countryside of Misano. I shot this entire video on the SONY FX3, which I think personally is one of the best cameras at this price point on the market right now, because it has 10-bit color, really solid autofocus, and Sony's constantly bringing new updates to the camera. Now, together with this camera, I used the Sony 24-105, and that once again is just because it's one of my favorite lenses. One, it's pretty affordable. Two, it has built-in lens stabilization, and this lens is overall just super flexible. So you can get wide shots like this with it, and you also can get really tight and intimate, super high quality close-ups, all with one single lens. And I also use
used a ProMist 1/4 for basically all the shots. And one thing I did here in this Bugatti video is shoot on a longer focal length. This way you kind of get a bit of background compression, and when you move around the car with your gimbal, the background, it moves much faster. So you get this kind of parallax effect, which feels really dynamic if you combine it with the movement of the gimbal. Here, for example, I was shooting a travel commercial, and I put my A7S3 on the Ronin S with about 100mm lens, and I turned around my subject, and you get this beautiful out of focus background which kind of whooshes by. So yeah, that's definitely a cool shot to remember. Let me just do a quick location change because it's getting cold, a little cold.
And we're back. We actually never left, and I'm still wearing the same shirt. My flight actually leaves tomorrow, so I'm just gonna finish the rest of the video here. Once again, I start my editing process by finding the right soundtrack for the video. Now this time I went on Artlist and I picked out a track that I felt had a nice build-up, climax and outro. And because I knew that the video was only going to be about 15 seconds long, I took the music and I chopped it up into my favorite parts and kind of put those together into one 15-second timeline. And I made sure that there was still like an emotional arc in that 15 seconds of the music that builds up, that fades out, that builds up again, and a climax, and then like a final swell that made the video come to an end nicely. I then added some sound effects to smoothen the transitions between the parts of the music that I chopped up and to create a bit more tension in the audio. Nowadays, I feel like everyone is kind of using the same music, and that's why putting your own spin on the music, by adding some sound effects, by rearranging the music a bit, that becomes a lot more important just because you want your track to stand out and to be a bit different from other tracks that might be out there. Try to get a bit creative with the sounds and try to blend the visuals with the sound as much as possible, because that's really going to help draw your viewer in. Once I had like a rough idea of what the structure of the music was going to be, I started out by putting all of my raw clips into one timeline and just carefully going through every single clip and selecting the best parts that I liked. This way I get a much better idea of the footage that I'm working with, and I can even, you know, use little bits at the end or at the beginning of clips that I might not have intended to use as creative transitions to add some more speed and some more dynamic shots to the video. And then I take those key moments like the intro, like the climax and like the outro, and I put those into the timeline first, and I make sure that they align with the emotional arc of the music, and then I start building out the edit around those and I start filling in the gaps. And another thing I try to do, especially when I didn't have a lot of time to shoot, is I try to maximize the shots that I have in the edit by cropping in a little bit or by adding some color correction, maybe adding some zooms. And this way you can take shots that might not be there 100% and bring them to a level where they might feel a lot better. Don't just throw away shots because they're a little shaky or because you feel like the framing of the image doesn't feel quite right. Try to get creative with the tools that you have in the post-production to really maximize the potential of your shots. The color grading process for me starts by me choosing the right picture profile and by exposing my footage properly. And when I'm using Sony, I'm always shooting in S-Log3 because that gives me the most flexible image to work with. And I start out by converting my footage from a log color space to the Rec 709 color space, and then from then on you start creating a look that fits your video. And in this case, because the Bugatti was grey and because we were shooting in November, Paris felt pretty colorless, and because of that I tried to add some blue into the image, and I tried to boost the reds a bit just to add a bit of color contrast between the blue and the red. I added a little bit of my secret sauce onto the image. I then go through every single shot to make sure it's properly balanced. I might darken some parts of the image, I might make some parts of the image a little bit brighter, and I just make sure that everything feels nice and cohesive. Like I mentioned in the intro, I originally shot this Bugatti video for the owner of the car, but Bugatti, they ended up getting in touch with me, and Bugatti ended up posting my video on their socials. What I did was I shot and edited the video and I uploaded it to my TikTok, to my Instagram, and literally about a day later I got a DM from the official Bugatti account asking if they could post it on their social media. So I sent them the file, and about a day later they posted the video on their Instagram. Within like 48 hours the video even hit like 1 million views. But of course I understand that not everyone has access to really expensive cars, meaning that you might think that you can't get the attention of a high-end brand like Bugatti. But the point is that I managed to get in contact with other brands like Ferrari and Audi and Polestar by applying a few of the following things. Number one is I share my work online so that brands, people, clients, whoever, so that they can actually see the work that I create. Number two is under-promise and over-deliver, which also doesn't really sound like anything that's really that groundbreaking, but most of the time my client has a list of wants and needs for the video, and as soon as I've kind of ticked those boxes, I try to add something to the video. So I try to surprise them in some way. I try to go the extra mile to get in some extra shots of the car driving, create a custom soundtrack, or just by perfecting the story a bit more in the pre-production. These things might cost you a bit more effort, but in the end they'll add up and they'll benefit you in the future, because the client and yourself, you'll be a lot happier with the end result. And number 3 is actually the most important step, which is create free work to get in contact with the right people, with the right brands. Now, once again, this might not sound like something incredibly groundbreaking, and I've actually heard a few YouTubers mention this. And of course, I'm not saying that you should always work for free, but sometimes you have to be smart about the jobs that you do for free, just to get the right connections.
And just to be clear, by doing free work, I don't only mean approaching clients and offering to do a video for them for free, but I'm also suggesting that you might create spec work that you write, shoot, and edit yourself that you can then later on add to your portfolio. Just like Danny Gewurz actually did. He scripted, shot, and edited a few commercials without the help of any other brand, and then he could add those commercials to his portfolio, and that way brands could see directly what he had to offer, and they're much more likely to book him in the future because they know what standard of quality they can expect.
And now, even though I might not have been paid for this Bugatti shoot, I did manage to get my foot into the door, and I got in contact with the marketing team. They ended up posting the video on their socials, which in turn gave me quite a bit of exposure. And I can also add the video to my portfolio, plus it shows other potential clients and brands that a high-end brand like Bugatti endorses my work. And I'm in no way insinuating that I've made it or that I'm where I want to be. I'm simply saying that this is what got me this far, and that anyone out there that applies this can also really benefit from doing these things. So before I end this video, I have to give a massive thanks to Stijn de Winter, who's also a filmmaker. You should definitely go check his work out here. He drove the camera car, he helped out with the filming, and yeah, he's a really cool guy. So go check his work out. Then I also have to give a huge thanks to Fifer for inviting me along to this shoot, and he's always been super positive and considerate about my work. So props to him for that. And then finally, I think I've had like 18 different finalies. Finally, I'd like to thank you guys for all the lovely comments I got on my previous 2 videos. I think both of them actually just hit 100,000 views, which just blows my mind. And we also hit 10k subs. So thanks for that, guys. Really appreciate it. And if I can help you out with anything you might want to know about gear or about my process, just let me know down below in the comments, or just drop me a message on my Instagram where I might respond a bit quicker. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.